And the problem is a lot of people equate entrepreneurship to, oh, I don't want to work for someone. I'm going to have my own business. But the problem with that is you end up owning your job rather than building a system that would scale. That's one of the worst ways, I think, to be an entrepreneur, because if you don't work, you don't get paid. So you need to figure out a way to build a system that can generate income regardless of whether you work or not. Invest your time wisely. Just make sure you're not wasting it. Or if you're wasting it, being intentional about setting a time limit of how much you want to waste before jumping back in.
Hey everyone, welcome to the Walk to Wealth podcast. If you're tuning in on YouTube or any of the podcast directories, make sure to do yourself one favor and give us a follow or subscribe, because I don't want you to miss out on any of the amazing guests that I'm bringing on this year. We have not missed yet, and I don't plan on missing anytime soon. Let's get right into this one. Vijay, for anyone who hasn't had the opportunity to get to know you yet, tell us about yourself, brother. Who are you and what do you do?
John, thank you so much for this opportunity. It's great to see you again. I mean, you're on my show a little bit back, and it's great to be back here. But for anyone who doesn't know me, hey everyone, I'm Vijay Kailash. I work in investment management, left my employer a few years back and started my own company to basically manage money. And on the side, I have an investment education company. And that's kind of where I am dedicating most of my resources and my time now, because I want to help other people retire early through learning how to invest. So that's kind of where we connected, because Walk to Wealth podcast, and let's walk to wealth.
Exactly. Let's walk to wealth. And speaking about walk to wealth, take us back in the time machine, back to when your walk first started. What was growing up in your household like? What was the topic of money like? What was it like just being a little kid and navigating the world?
It was really interesting. So I'm an immigrant, moved to the US in 2001 from India. So I was about 5 years old. And my parents, as immigrants, they didn't really have much money coming here, but it was really interesting to watch them save and live extremely frugally. And I didn't realize this at the time, but I did realize that they were working a lot, but I didn't realize how much they were saving. And, through that savings, they were able to buy their first property. And it was actually a house which we lived in. And after we moved out, they basically rented it out. And at the time, I was a young kid, so I didn't really realize it. But decades later, I look back and I realized, oh, my parents got into the real estate business unintentionally, because they buy a house, they live in it for a few years, and then they move to a different house and then they rent that out. And they just continued doing this over and over again. And before we knew it, we had, a few properties. And because of that, with all this, property appreciation, they were able to retire in their 50s. And now they're, traveling the world, kind of enjoying early retirement. And it was interesting because I don't think it was actually intentional. I think it just kind of happened. And I wonder how it would have been if they were more intentional about it. So looking back, I looked at it and I realized, okay, real estate is a great way to invest. So I bought my first property in 2019 and I wanted to save money. So I basically lived in one room and I rented out the other 2 rooms on Airbnb. So I didn't even live in the master bedroom of my own house. I lived in the smallest room and I rented out the other 2 rooms, and that basically covered my mortgage. And I realized I was saving almost 100% of my paycheck from my job. So I used that to fund a down payment for my second property in 2020. And it was actually interesting. I got under contract in February of 2020, a month before the pandemic. And so I was able to lock in a great price. And then and because it was a new construction, the house wasn't even built yet. I just put in deposit, locked in the price. And then by the time the house was actually ready in August 2020, I was able to lock in one of the lowest interest rates as well. So I got extremely lucky. And again, I can't say I timed it because that was pure luck. I can't take any credit for that, but it worked out extremely well in my favor. And this new house was a 5-bedroom house. So I did live in the master bedroom. I lived in that room, rented out the other 4 rooms. And because of that, I was able to generate enough cash flow to leave my job to follow my entrepreneurial pursuits, because I knew that from a young age, I've always been an entrepreneur, but I wanted to give myself a shot before I have kids, before I have dependents, before I have anyone depending on my income to, hey, let's just try entrepreneurship. Worst case, doesn't work out great. I could always go get a job, but now's the time to jump in and try it out.
Yeah. Before we segue into the conversation, you brought up a point. You said that you always knew you were an entrepreneur and you decided not to give it a shot. Was it something that was kind of kept away because the opportunity hasn't presented itself, or were you always like trying out little entrepreneurial endeavors? Because I always say my story, I didn't have the lemonade stand. I didn't have the paper route. I wasn't selling cards or selling sneakers, or whatever. One entrepreneurship hit me like a train, but you said you had it earlier on. So were you, cultivating that slowly along the way, or is it something that you just like, hey, I know I had this, but I'm gonna put it on pause and then picked it up?
Yeah, so I've had I lost count, maybe 9 businesses now. But my first business was actually in 8th grade. I was selling Mountain Dew out of my locker, and that's kind of how it all started. And so there was an auctioning class, and it was for a nonprofit, and someone was auctioning off a can of Mountain Dew for $5. At the time, it blew my mind. I thought, okay, someone's willing to spend $5 for one can. So after I realized there's demand, after I got home from school, there was a gas station really close by. So I walked over there, got a 12-pack, and the next day I brought it to school. I'm just like, okay, let's just see what would happen. I was able to sell all 12 before lunchtime. And at that time, it was my first real money that I've made. I was making 10 cents a week with allowance. My parents they gave me some allowance, they incentivized something, but it was nothing. But making $1 per can in 8th grade, it was mind blowing. And so in 1 month, I was making over $150 in profit after all expenses. And at that time, my parents told me, they're like, hey, you probably shouldn't be selling sugary drinks to middle schoolers, so you should probably shut down. So I'm like, okay, all right. But that's when I caught the entrepreneurial bug. So after that, I realized, okay, I want to get into business. So in my high school, I was lucky enough to have business courses that were offered. So I took, I think, 14 or 15 business courses throughout high school. And I was just learning so much about entrepreneurship. In fact, we actually had a class called entrepreneurship. That was for seniors only. But to take that class, we needed prerequisites. And to take those prerequisites, we needed even more prerequisites. So the only way you could take that class senior year is to start taking business classes in sophomore year. And so from that age, because of my Mountain Dew business, I was proactive enough to, okay, I want to sign up for these courses so I could take it junior year, so then I could take it senior year. And that entrepreneurship class, we actually sold milkshakes in the lunchroom to other students. And it was cool because other people in the class, they were also their own milkshake company. So we had to kind of compete on pricing for market share, build our own brand. And it was a really cool experience. And that's when I knew, okay, entrepreneurship, it's great. You don't have to rely on someone else for income. As long as you have something that there's demand for, you could find ways to earn income. So fast forward a few years after that, actually also in high school, I taught guitar and drums. That was another business I had. The thing is, I didn't play either of these instruments. So what I did was I went on YouTube. I learned how to play these instruments. I learned a single lesson and I taught it to someone else. And then for the next lesson, I went on YouTube. I learned another lesson and I taught to someone else. I continued doing this over and over again. And that's how I basically made my money. And that's, again, entrepreneurship is something I realized, hey, you can actually earn a living if you do it right. If you know there's demand, you can put yourself out there, able to sell. And it was all these skills that all came back to self-improvement. And that's something that I'm very passionate about myself. So it's like, okay, how can I grow financially? And to do that, you have to improve yourself and always continue improving.
Man, that's amazing. So pretty much you had this business where you're literally teaching a lesson that you just learned. And before the next lesson came about, you would learn it and then teach it. And it reminds me of the story that I heard at one time. It was, I think the book is called The Man Who Got Away. And in there, he was talking about, I think he taught a sociology class or something like that to college students. And he was doing that for almost 6 months. And when they asked him, how on earth were you able to teach a whole college level course on sociology or something like that? I forget what the subject was. He was like, all I did was make sure that I was one chapter ahead. That's all you got to do, man. And it's so crazy because no matter what age you are, no matter how old you are, if you just know a little bit more than a person who wants to learn something, you can teach them up to that point. And while you're teaching them up to that point, you're also simultaneously learning the next step. So if they have a question, you always just have to be 1 or 2 steps ahead and you can be fine. You don't have to have the whole game plan figured out to get into entrepreneurship. You don't have to have the whole, step-by-step process to get to the end before you get the first step. You just have to have an idea, as you said, and then know that there's demand to match the idea that you want to get in there. And then from there, figure it out and then go along the way. And that's how a lot of entrepreneurs get started, is figuring it out. So let me get your story right. So you started your first Mountain Dew business. You're making $150 a month in profit, which is the equivalent of $50,000 a year in adult world, right?
I only did for 1 month. I did for 1 month. In the 1 month, I made $150, but it was great. Yeah.
So you started off profitable first month, which is highly, super highly difficult to do in entrepreneurship. So off the gate, you already were a successful, profitable entrepreneur. And so let me ask you now. So you're taking all these entrepreneurship business classes in high school. Now you get into college. What was it like there? What was your journey like navigating? You have all this business and entrepreneurial experience that most people, especially back then, this is before entrepreneurship really got super popular like it is now in mainstream. What was it like? Was it difficult to find other people that kind of resonated with you and had the same headspace as you? Or like, what was that like navigating the world?
I'd say you're able to identify those who resonate with you, but just because you're not necessarily an entrepreneur doesn't mean, okay, I'm not going to talk to you. It just means, okay, there's less in common to talk about. But of course, we always find something else to discuss. But you tend to gravitate towards those people who are like you, right? In whatever aspect of life it is, right? Whether you're an athlete, you tend to gravitate toward people who eat well and are to take care of themselves, right? You don't want to hang out with people who smoke and eat pizza all day. And so that's kind of the same thing, right? I tended to gravitate towards entrepreneurs, but in business school, even though it was an undergrad, when I studied business administration, a lot of people were not necessarily entrepreneurial. There were definitely those who were, but a lot of them were, okay, I got a degree in business because I fell into it. And, I get it. It's something that, I don't really know what I want to do, but business degree, sure, it's pretty flexible. I can do that. And those great people, they're doing great now, but they weren't necessarily entrepreneurs. And so this is kind of like going through the crowd, figuring out who stands out and who is wanting to do something more than just work at a corporation, which is, there's nothing wrong with it. And I think it's a great lifestyle for a lot of people. I just tended to gravitate towards those who wanted something more or in addition or something different than that type of lifestyle.
Yeah, I love that you brought it up, and you didn't really call it out, but the law of proximity is what you're pretty much dancing around, and it's so important. I was literally talking to my girlfriend the other night, and I think it was last night from the day we're recording this actually, and she was saying that how she, got a workout in with a couple of her friends, but it didn't feel right, and I could tell because when I asked her how was it, she was like, yeah, it was cool. And as soon as she said it was cool, I was like, yeah, those are not the people she needs to be around. Not because they're bad people, but because at least for working out, it's like that goal that you have and the goal that they have clearly aren't aligned, and it doesn't have to be the same goal. But if you're shooting for the stars, you may be shooting for star A. This person may be shooting for star B. It doesn't matter, but you guys are both shooting for the stars, so you guys are going to help propel each other forward. But if you're shooting for star A and someone else is shooting for, let's say, sky A, although they're both A, there's different parts in the journey, so they're not going to be aiming as high. And I was like, yeah, as soon as she said it was cool, I was like, you need to surround yourself with people who are also going to push you, who are as strong where you're weak at, who are just as committed, who want to take this seriously. And I was like, it's super important because I know mentally you can be around those people and not have them affect you, but even that takes mental energy away from you. Even if you're still functioning at your, whatever level that you normally operate at, if you put other people that don't want to function at that level, that is going to slowly either A, drag you down, or B, you might be strong enough mentally to not let that affect you, but that's going to still take energy to make sure that your energy isn't tampered with. So I was like, find other people that also have big goals that are trying to do something similar to what you got going on. So you don't have to do that. Like this, imagine how much more progress you would make if everyone around you was also in shape, super athletic, and super serious about taking their health seriously. That would make
exactly
and extra hard.
Yeah, and there's something to say about the opportunity cost. It's not hanging out with them is bad, but there's a giant opportunity cost in not hanging out with those who do actually propel you and help you achieve your goals. And so they're not bad people. It's just, hey, you're wasting time and not hanging out with the right group.
Yeah, and I love that you mentioned opportunity cost because it's something that once I learned about opportunity costs, so the only class I think that maybe one of only two classes I thought was valuable in college was microeconomics 101. That is when I first learned about opportunity costs. I was like, there's a secret hidden cost that is low-key ruling the world that majority of people who don't understand economics don't know anything about. And this is just like in the beginner level course. I didn't take any super high level economics. It's like opportunity cost. When that concept was presented to me, I was like, damn. And then when I made my decision to drop out of college, I was like, the opportunity cost isn't the tuition that I'm paying. It's all these hours that I could spend trying to get this entrepreneurship stuff on the road and get that ball rolling on top of all the tuition costs that I would have incurred if I had stayed. So I was like, wow, college isn't just expensive. it's extremely expensive, especially if you're an entrepreneur, because all that time that you're focusing on the books, you could be focusing on getting in the trenches of whatever industry you want to get into and figuring it out. So once that came about, and you just so happened, I also went to college during the pandemic, which is also something that wasn't in the plan as well. But when I first figured that out, and I was like, man, I gotta take this opportunity while it's here in front of me. And worst case scenario, because similar to yourself, I'll come out of the pandemic, the world for the most part was at a complete standstill. So I could just pick up where I left off and be perfectly fine. So I had this amazing opportunity. And to kind of get back to what we were talking about earlier, you mentioned fast forward a little bit after college. I mentioned that you bought your first property in 2019 and you rented out the other rooms, not even the other, part of the unit, like the whole unit. You rented out the rooms that while you were still living in there, right? What was that experience like house hacking before, I'm not sure if house hacking the term was, I don't know when it was coined, but essentially house hacking and house hacking for Airbnb, which is even more genius.
Right. No, the reason why I chose Airbnb is because I realized some weekends I wanted the house to myself in case I want to have social gatherings or, bring people over, whatnot. So I realized if I had a roommate, I can't just kick them out. But if I did Airbnb, I could just block off certain weekends. And so that way I still get the luxury of having my own place or bringing people over. Or when, during the week, no one's coming over anyway. So it's like, okay, might as well get some revenue and they'll pay off the mortgage. And I like the fact that you used the word house hacking. No, that's exactly what I did. And it was, I think that was probably one of the best financial decisions I've ever made. Yeah, it was short-term sacrifices. Yeah, I was living with strangers. I've definitely have some fun stories with it. But I think it's because of that, I'm able to get so many years of my life back. It's, again, because the first house isn't going to make you a millionaire. It will not.
Yeah.
But the first house is the step to get to the second house or to the third or fourth, which will eventually make you a millionaire. And what's the point of money? It's to buy back your time. That's at least my definition of it, right? I'm not living luxurious at all. I'm living way, way, way below my means right now. I'm barely, making any money right now, but I'm living such a more fulfilled life because I'm doing something I love and I'm not working at a job which I dislike, right? And so I get my time, I get my freedom back. And that's why I was happy to do the sacrifices living with strangers. And I think it's starting to pay off.
Yeah, no, I love that you bring that up because that's also where I'm at right now. And recently I found this one curve and it's pretty much like a bell curve and it shows the level of happiness of people. And in their 20s, the curve is at one of its highest peaks. And then from there, we get into the real world throughout our late 20s, into our 30s and 40s and 50s. It's just slope, downwards. And then after your 50s, you start getting into 60s, start sloping back upwards. And then once we get past our 60s, then we end up being happy again because we realize how much of that stuff that we put ourselves through really didn't matter at all. It was all pretty much just this thing that we're fed and we were just a cog in whatever system that we were at. And then we realized that a lot of our life was pretty much wasted because we were just a cog, because we spent all this time working, because we spent all this time not doing what we truly want to do, not being fulfilled. And I'm in your boat right now as well, man, because for me, money has been tight. And if anyone listens to my walks in insert month, so like my walk in February or my walk in January, like I share the good, the bad, and the ugly of where I'm at and the lessons that I've learned for that month. And it's like, it's been hard for a while, man, like financially. But despite that, I've been able to help so many people since then. And it's also entrepreneurship. Yes, it is a business, but I'm people focused, I'm people focused, I don't want to say I'm not profit focused, but people before profits is what I'm trying to get at. And I love that you're doing the same thing. So let me ask you, why do you think a lot of people, when they get onto entrepreneurship, get pretty much trapped being an employee for themselves? Because as you said, you're helping, you feel fulfilled, you're helping a lot of people. But a lot of people start this business, this entrepreneurial endeavor, to break away from the job that they were usually making good money or maybe not making any money in, to get into entrepreneurship, to probably work double the hours that they were working on in the actual job and not be doing well. So why do most people become employees of their own entrepreneurial business?
Right. I mean, to answer that, you've probably heard of Robert Kiyosaki's Rich Dad Poor Dad. I mean, there's a very little chance you're going to be an entrepreneur without reading that book. But in there, of course, he talks about the cash flow quadrant, right? E for employee, S for self-employed. B for big business owner, and I for investor. And the problem is a lot of people equate entrepreneurship to, oh, I don't want to work for someone. I'm going to have my own business. But the problem with that is you end up owning your job rather than building a system that would scale. And so entrepreneurship, there's so many different ways to look at it, right? You could have a hot dog stand and you could own it. Yeah, you're an entrepreneur, but if you don't work, you don't get paid. And that's one of the worst ways, I think, to be an entrepreneur, because if you don't work, you don't get paid. So you need to figure out a way to build a system that can generate income regardless of whether you work or not. And for example, that hot dog stand, what you could do is you could hire people to run hot dog stands for you, hire a manager to manage them, and then based on how much revenue you're getting, you can basically be hands off. And so there are ways to scale. It's still the same product. You're still serving the same clientele, but there's ways to scale it to become hands off and generate revenue regardless of whether you work in the business or not. It's a very dangerous trap that I've noticed myself getting into. I mean, of course, when you start a business, you'll most likely need to do 100% of everything. But soon you could start outsourcing, you could start growing and start automating things. But it's just a lot of people end up staying there without automation. And that's where the differences happen.
Yeah. And you mentioned too with entrepreneurship, like it takes a lot to get started. You're wearing all the hats. Usually also takes a lot of time to start making money depending on how you get into it. That's not always the case. Like as you know, with yourself and your Mountain Dew business, right? Sometimes you can be profitable month one. But for a lot of other people, I know frugality,
like a real business,
yeah. With a real business, it's usually hard to get up and running and get clientele and get your feet, find your stride. So in terms of frugality, because I know you're also a master when it comes to personal finances, how does one prepare themselves to get into entrepreneurship? Like what should one do when their personal finances, or what would you recommend one doing with their personal finances leading up to whenever it is that they break off into entrepreneurship, whether they're leaving a job, whether it's coming straight out of college, maybe they don't have a job right now and they just want to get started. Like what should one do with their finances so that they can be prepared for whatever storms and trials and tribulation that may come and this amazing roller coaster we call entrepreneurship?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is having access to liquidity, cash, or access to lines of credit. It's probably one of the most important things. So it's one of the reasons why most businesses fail is because they don't have enough capital to keep operations running. So when I became an entrepreneur full-time, my businesses were costing more than my lifestyle, and I wasn't generating enough revenue for my businesses. And so there was this area where, hey, I'm taking my own personal Vijay Kailash's money to fund a business that was literally a baby losing money. And I have to decide, okay, either I have to liquidate this business, just get rid of it, or I need to really grow it, go get aggressive at it. And so based on what you think is going to happen with the business long term, you have to decide for yourself. But I think having access to capital, make sure your cash flow is intact. For me, luckily I had real estate rental properties that were paying most of the bills. I'm still, not making that much money, but it's enough to sustain myself at least for a year or two while I tried this out. And so I think the biggest thing is make sure you have cash flow or access to credit or access to capital before you jump in. And also before you leave your job, definitely make sure your product works, right? Like actually get started, make sure you're generating revenue. And then once you need more time than your full-time job, and you think your full-time job is an opportunity cost, like we talked about, at that point, it makes sense to leave, but don't leave prematurely hoping that you'll have more time for your business, because there's, the Pareto's principle.
80-20.
Yeah, the 80-20 rule, right? Or just, if I give you, Parkinson's law, that's what I'm talking about. No, Parkinson's law. If I give you a week to clean the house and...
You're going to wait a week, yeah.
Yeah, you're going to wait a week to get it done. But if I'm like, hey, you have to clean in 20 minutes, you're going to get it done in 20 minutes. That's what having more things to do on your plate will help you with entrepreneurship. And so if you're doing more and you have to make sure it's the right bit of more, it can actually help you with entrepreneurship. So it makes sense to keep a full-time job, work on your business on the side.
So it's Parkinson's plus Pareto equals a very efficient, very productive entrepreneur, essentially, right?
Exactly. That's exactly it. Yeah, the 80-20 with Parkinson's law. Yeah.
All right. So I love their story too, because this reminds me of, so I told you before we hit record that my course, I'm working on it. And for me, I spent a ton of time focusing on the presentation to sell the course, a ton of hours. but I spent absolutely no time leading at the point of me actually presenting the presentation. Up to that point, I didn't spend any time creating the course. I spent all my focus on the presentation to make it sure that it was as compelling and appealing as possible. But I didn't spend a single second actually creating the course, because if I had that presentation done and I presented and no one bought the course, I would have been so angry. I would have been so frustrated. I would have spent so much time, exhausted so much energy, resources, and money, and not had anything to show for it. So what I did is, I said, I presented the presentation and I got 5 people to buy the course at the presentation. And at that point in time, as I said, there was no course to be bought. It was just like a checkout page and there's nothing created. So what I did was I was like, all right, now that I tested this out and now that I have people who gave me money, and the course was $497 at that time. Probably by the time this comes out, it'll be a little higher. But it was $497 at the time, which is no like piece of chump change, because almost 2/3 of American can't even afford a $500 emergency expense. And I got 5 people that were like, hey, John, sign me up. Here's my card, tap, tap, and paid. And I was like, oh, shoot. People gave me money. That means now I got to run through with this. So it was like a blessing and a curse, because a blessing because I just got some income, but it's also a curse because now it's like, I got to see this through, because now I have people who are expecting something. So then I got the wheels churning, and I thought, you would have had a break to celebrate, but no, as soon as I had the class and people bought the course, my mind then shifted to like, all right, now that the presentation is done, people paid. Now it's like, all right, how on earth do I figure out creating this course? So I made a Kajabi account and got right to it and started creating the outline and stuff like that and doing all that stuff. And literally at the time we were recording this, today I finally finished putting the course together. This is April 13th, right? And in March, I believe my class was like the 12th or something. It's like literally a month later, my course actually finished, but I knew not to create the course before Sunday because I haven't tested out the idea. I didn't know if this is something that was going to work. So that's super important. I want to really bring that home, because like, if you don't test that idea out, you could be pretty much less in a very bad situation.
That's absolutely right. You got to make sure you pre-sell whatever you want to sell. Make sure there's actually demand before you jump full time in, because you're right, it can get really expensive. And it's definitely a mistake that I've made a few times and continue to make. And I am learning slowly from my mistakes.
Yeah. So Vijay, let me ask you, right? So now you made the jump. What was that like, jumping into this entrepreneurship thing when you had something that's been stable for a long period of time? Like, what were the feelings that you were going through? What were you feeling? What were you thinking mentally, knowing that, hey, although, yes, I have some real estate income coming in monthly that I'll take care of everything, but man, there's something about stability, that the golden handcuffs, they call it. Yeah. And it's something about the golden handcuffs that are extremely hard for the majority of people to break out. I think like 5% or like 2% of the population is entrepreneurship. If I think they were to do a study, I'm pretty sure a lot more people would love to get into it, but they're just tired with them golden handcuffs. So what was it like? Walk us through, what were you thinking? What were you feeling around the time when you finally decided to make the jump?
It was probably one of the happiest moments of my life, because not even because it was a bad job or anything. I loved the company. I loved who I worked with. It was a great company. Really enjoyed the job, but it was more so that, hey, now my passion, my mission in life is now aligning to what I want to do. And I think it was the sense of almost fulfillment of, hey, this is my purpose in life. This is what I get to do full time. And it was a little bit scary, but not as scary as I thought, because yeah, no more income. Health insurance, all that, I have to buy it now. And it's taking a very comfortable lifestyle to basically stripping it off. But then now I'm living on the bare necessities, and I'm realizing, okay, I'm okay doing that because I know it's not forever. Again, worst case, I can go back and get a job. It's not the end of the world. And so it just came back to, okay, this is your chance, Vijay. You're buying yourself 2 years of time. Do what you can in 2 years. And then in 2 years, decide whether you want to continue going down this path, or you decide, okay, let's just call it quits, go back to a job, work on another business on the side. Then at that point, once you feel like, okay, this might be a better business, then you could try again. Because I'm kind of liking this. Work for 5 years, take 2 years off, focus on a passion project or focus on your business, focus on something, and then go back and work a few more years. So you kind of alternate. And I know in the fire community, we call it early retirement, or not necessarily early retirement. What is it? It's mini retirements. That's the word.
Yeah.
where you work for a few years, you take a few years off, you get back to work, and you just do that. You alternate over and over again. And that way, instead of waiting till you're 65 to retire, you're taking mini retirements while you're still healthy, while you still have some money, while you can do whatever you want. And then once you're running low on funds, you can go back to get a job or focus on, another way to make money.
Yeah, and I think there's a lesson here too that you're sharing without even actually sharing. And the lesson that I'm picking up is that you said you gave yourself 2 years to try this out and give it your all. So many people within the first week, if it doesn't work, if it doesn't blow up and go well, then they think that this whole idea sucks. It was a failure. And usually some people say 6 months, but you gave yourself 2 years to really dedicate to something. And I just think that goes to show this stuff takes time. There's no easy cookie cutter method unless you have a very fortunate, star aligning moment and you just hit it off. For the most part, it usually takes a while. And I love the fact that you mentioned that, hey, I'm going to give myself 2 years to figure this out and make this work. So many people are too caught up in making it happen now. They get rich quick and they get caught up. One of the books I love is The Richest Man in Babylon. It was super annoying to read, man. Super annoying to read, but those principles were sound, super sound. And one of the ones that is coming to mind now is when they brought the gems to the other city and they came back and they got screwed over and lost their money. And so many people are trying to get rich quick with the shiny gems and not really understand what they're doing. And then they end up getting screwed over. And now they have to go back to a job that they don't like or do whatever it was that they were trying to escape for even longer because they were trying to get rich quick. So I love that you mentioned that there. And so I kind of want to ask you too to follow up with your story. So you gave yourself 2 years. So now how's it going since you decided to do something that was simultaneously filling your heart and filling your pockets at the same time? How has it been navigating this, going back to the bare necessities and trying to figure it out all over from the ground up?
I got to tell you so I left my job January 2022. So it's been about 15 months now. And it's probably been the most incredible journey. Honestly, it's a lot of ups and downs. When I first started, I was so the most positive emotions possible. I don't know. It was just super happy, super exciting to literally wake up every day, do what I love. And I loved it. And then after that, of course, it kind of simmers down. You start getting hit with hardships. So let me walk you through a quick, kind of my entrepreneurial journey in the last 15 months. So I left my job I worked at a bank. And so I actually could not have stayed at the bank and done this on the side because of conflicts of interest. So I literally had to leave. So what I did was I started up a fund to manage money. Specifically, I'm an options trader. And what the strategy was, it's a long-term investment strategy. And it makes a lot of sense. I was doing it in my retirement account. So before I left, I raised I got some soft commitments of capital, about $1 million, not that much for a fund. And I was raising this capital, but the problem was I didn't really keep in touch with the investors when I was raising this capital. So when I finally left, I reached back out to them. I'm like, hey, I launched. Are you still interested in investing? And they basically said, oh, Vijay, sorry, I'm under contract for a 250 unit apartment or multifamily. And so I can't commit that capital anymore. And so I actually left my employer with $0 with assets under management. And that's, so it's pretty bad. But within 2 months, I was able to raise some capital from a few investors. And I don't know if you looked at the stock chart in 2022, basically the market started going down. And this is a great strategy for long-term investing, which I was using, but it still does go down when the market goes down, but it won't go down as much. So in 2022, the market went down about 20%, the S&P 500. We were only down about 7%. And so we still did better, but the problem was raising capital from investors while the market was going down, knowing that, hey, if I invest, I'm going to lose money because just the way the strategy is set up. So I chose not to raise capital, and I was looking for more ways to basically figure out a different strategy to invest so then people can, make money during bear markets as well. And so what I decided to do was, okay, what if instead of managing money for wealthy people, what if I were to teach my funds strategy so people can actually use it in their own retirement accounts? Because retirement accounts, you can't touch it for 30 or 40 years anyways. And this is a great, fantastic strategy for long-term investing. So I decided to basically develop a course. I didn't pre-sell it like you did. And what I did was I recorded the course and then I was able to sell it. And I got, 56 students now. But basically the course teaches people how to invest in index funds but also sell options to generate income on their stocks. And so this income could be anywhere between 20 to 40% a year. And it's actual cash that gets deposited into your brokerage account, which you could use to buy even more stocks, or you could basically withdraw when you're able to at retirement age. So it's a great strategy again, but short term. So that's kind of where I'm switching my strategy's focus. And so I launched the fund, and to raise capital, I also launched a podcast. So I was doing 3 different things. And this is kind of where everything started getting derailed. I'm looking back at hindsight. So what not to do? I launched a fund. I created a podcast so then I could network with individuals. So I go to a networking event. It's just saying, hey, would you like to invest? I would ideally say, hey, would you like to come on my podcast, share your journey? So that way it's kind of a networking tool. And that was the reason I started my podcast. But at that same time, I realized, okay, I'm just interviewing for the sake of interviewing people. I enjoy it. I like learning because I started bringing on other people in the fields of entrepreneurship, investing, self-improvement for my own personal benefit. But then what if I could share that knowledge and experience with the other listeners? And that's kind of how it all started. And so I was doing the podcast, I was running the fund, and I launched an education company. And it was just me, and I was spread way too thin. And so now I'm realizing, Vijay, you're not doing great at anything. So figure out what you truly like to do. And this is where, since you and I last talked a few months ago, John, this is where I started, okay, what if I just shut down the fund for a few years while I work on a new investment strategy for short-term investing? I still keep the course open so I can still teach people how to invest for long-term. And so now basically what I'm doing is I'm going back to the product development stage of my investment strategy, and I'm looking to find better ways to invest in short-term market conditions. So regardless of whether market goes up or down, I want to create a strategy that can make money consistently. And that's what I'm focusing all my efforts on right now. So I'm literally just shutting down the fund just for a few years while I work on the product. I mean, keep the course open so that I can still teach people who want to be passive long-term investors. Hey, this is how you invest in the stock market. This is how you generate income. And that way people can still achieve FIRE. And that's kind of where I'm getting my purpose and passion is how do I help people while I'm going back to the product development stage. And anyone that's listening to this who is an entrepreneur, you're going to go through, maybe you'll most likely go through very similar ups and downs. You're going to try something, realize, hey, it doesn't work, or you're going to try something. It's like, oh my gosh, this works so well. Why didn't I do this from day one? And you only find that out by actually trying. And throughout this entire process, I realized, we started this interview saying, I love entrepreneurship. But in reality, what I've learned in the last 15 months is, yes, entrepreneurship is really cool, but I really, really like investing and trading. And that's where my passion's really coming from. I just happen to use entrepreneurship as a vehicle to invest and trade. But I realized if I had to just do one thing, it comes back to just watching the markets and actually making trades. And that's where I decided to focus my efforts the last 3 months. So we'll see where the next year takes us, but it's all coming full circle. I love managing money and investing. And that's where I think I'm going to be focusing the next few years of my life.
Yeah, I love your story, brother, because I literally was going through the same exact thing at the same exact time that you were doing. I had my podcast going, but I wasn't as niched as you. You had all your stuff within the personal finance kind of thing. I had the podcast going, which is on Walk to Wealth, where I'm helping young people, building wealthy, abundant lives. Then I had real estate, which was this entirely different ballpark that I was trying to do. And then I had a marketing company that I was trying to do on top of working at the restaurant, still like 20 to 30 hours a week. So I was just doing all this stuff at the same time. The podcast, I was helping young people. The real estate as an agent, I was trying to help buyers and sellers. And then the marketing company, I was trying to help real estate agents. So I had 3 different things with 3 different ideal avatars for each thing. And on top of that, a part-time job at a restaurant. So it's like, I was just like you, man. Everything was going downhill. My podcast numbers were going down month after month. My social media company, it was pretty much, after my first client, I decided to scrap that up. Real estate, I did like 3 rentals last year before I decided like, hey, let me just not focus on this at all. Like I was everywhere, man. So I just love your story and I resonate with it so much because I was doing a lot of things, not doing any of them well. And then I had to put one aside for the time, right? It's not that I have to quit for life. It's like I have to quit for the time right now so I can focus on getting this stuff up and running so that then eventually I can come back into it in a way that I want. And I just so happened the marketing company, I took another angle, but I would have never known about course creation had I not tried to do, content creation for somebody and done for you services. If I didn't do that, I would never realize that I hated that. And then I would have never stumbled into the course side of things where I can package my knowledge package my expertise and sell that. So again, man, I resonate so much with your story. Vijay, man, it's been an amazing conversation. I love all the, your nuggets and stories that you shared. Where can we connect with you? Where could we find you at? I know you have the podcast going. And for anyone who didn't hear us in the beginning, I was also an amazing guest on. So where could we connect with you and find you at so we can get more of what you got going on?
Of course. Well, thanks so much. So anyone that's listening, make sure you give John's podcast a 5-star review, thumbs up, subscribe, do all of it. This has been great, John. Thank you so much. People can connect with me I have my own podcast called The Vijay Kailash Show, where we talk about entrepreneurship, investing, self-improvement. Similar to John, I bring on very successful entrepreneurs, coaches, business owners, investors, and people who care about growth. And most of the people are not selling anything. It's purely like, hey, I'm here to help you. And I gain a lot from my own show. I mean, I'm not trying to say anything there, but place to check out. But also, I have something free for you guys. If you are interested in taking free email mini course, you can go to optionsellingsecrets.com. And on the course or on the website, the email mini course, you get 7 or 8 videos basically teaching how to invest in the stock market, what options are. And then at the end, of course, you'll get an opportunity to join a course if you wish to. No obligation whatsoever. But if you need anything, reach out to me on Instagram or LinkedIn. I'm happy to help in any way I can. Thanks so much for listening, guys.
Hold on. We still got our famous 5 rapid fire question.
Oh my gosh.
Get right into it, man. Question number 1. What is the most impactful lesson you've learned in life?
First thing that comes to my mind is invest your time wisely. Just make sure you're not wasting it. Or if you're wasting it, being intentional about setting a time limit of how much you want to waste before jumping back in.
What is the most admirable trait a person can have?
Their willingness to help others and not expecting anything in return.
If you could change someone's life with one book, which book would you recommend?
Rich Dad Poor Dad.
What is the legacy that you're trying to leave behind?
I want to help people live the life that they want to live without being tied to a job that they don't necessarily like. And that is through financial independence education.
And for anyone that wants to embark on their walk to wealth today, what is the first step you recommend they take?
Invest in your own education. Yes, you can invest in the S&P 500, but let's say you only get a 10% return. $1,000, you're going to make $100 a year. That's not enough. With $1,000, you can learn a skill that will make you thousands of dollars every week if you do it properly. So invest in your education, not necessarily in the S&P 500.
Vijay, I had an amazing time catching up with you. Thanks again for hopping on. Thanks again for sharing all the value that you did. I know my listeners will definitely be able to take a ton away from this because your story, as I said, is so relatable. It's not, your super millionaire, trillionaire trust fund baby story. Like, I love your story and what you had to go through, the obstacles and hurdles you had to overcome to get to where you're at now. And I love what you got going on. So thanks again for hopping on.
Hey, thanks so much for your time, man.